Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be about some PowerShell stuff and thinking through kind of when to use functions, and also giving an example of how a project kind of comes to be. Before I dive in, I want to remind you, you can support the channel by clicking like on this video, and as well as subscribing, ringing the bell when you do, and feel free to share this with others if you think they would find it useful in their journey in PowerShell. So I'm working on a little project for my home lab, just a basic Active Directory environment, and what I want to do is make a script that will automate the creation of users. Now I'm kind of making two things out of this project. One is going to be a script that would have user interaction, and the other is going to be a script that truly would be fully automated. Like, you'll feed it a CSV file of potential users and it'll make the users for you. So this script I'm going to go over is the one that is designed to be interactive. Now this is a work in progress. I started working on it a day ago, as a matter of fact, so it's not finished and you'll probably see some mistakes. But what I wanted to talk about was kind of the thought process behind it, because if you're new to PowerShell and you sit there and you're like, I want to write a script, kind of the next thing often that comes up is, all right, well, what do I do? Or you get into you dig into your script and you start realizing that you know, in order to do the thing that you want to do, you need to do this first. And then to make that work, you need to do this first. And then to make that work, you need to do this first. I think the term for that in the dev world is called yak shaving. And you can find yourself kind of spiraling out of control and you never actually get anything done. And then you have your scope creep of, well, my script does this, but what if I added this little thing or that little thing? And so this is kind of a short little my journey to where I am with the script. So with this particular thing, I'm wanting to do three things. One is determine the number of users that are to be made, and these aren't real like human users for humans. This is just test users that you know, in your little lab, you get your domain controller, you would run this script, and it would create some users for you to be able to mess with. The other piece is going to create passwords for these users. And as an added thing, I'm going to give the user a choice whether or not they want to specify a password, have a single randomly generated password that's the same for every user, or every user get their own password. Then we'll actually make the users, and the final step is going to be spitting out a CSV file of what was created. So that way you, as the administrator of your lab, you have your user credentials and you can do some stuff. So there's no one right way to do this, but again, this is kind of my thought process and how I've approached this particular project, and also some downfalls that I've had. So I'm in my GitLab page, by the way, gitlab.com/Eddie Jennings, if you want to see any of the stuff I'm working on. There's not a whole lot there. I don't have a ton of time, but this particular scripting thing kind of became an itch this weekend, and I had to scratch the itch of doing some scripting. So I'm going to start. So this is the script itself, AD user generation. I'm going to go to the commits. I'm going to look at the very first commit of this, and I want to view the file. So before I'm crucified, there's a reason why I'm using WriteHost with this. If you follow Jeffrey Snover at all, and if you're a PowerShell user and don't know who Jeffrey Snover is, you need to look him up. He's pretty important to the world of PowerShell, and I think I mentioned this before in another video. Everything I've seen about him, like, you know, tweets, and I've seen some videos and such. He's a pretty nice guy, but he's adamant about the WriteHost being a terrible thing, and 99% of the time I agree with him. But this little script here is designed to basically have some user interface with it, and WriteHost is or at least in my opinion, the right solution for the user interface is not something that I want the user to be able to turn on and off, which that's where you get into your write verbose and write information and other commandlets for that. So with my script here, after doing a couple lines of making my WriteHost, I'm going, I'm tired of typing background color, all that kind of thing. Now I'm typing in again here, but the idea is if I want to change this later on, it'll be much easier just to change the variables. You don't necessarily have to do this in PowerShell, but if I know of variables I'm going to make ahead of time, I will often make them as null variables, so they already exist. Again, it's not something you have to do. One point of scope creep with this, so remember I said that I want to get the users to tell me how many users, or get the person running the script to tell me how many users they want to make, and the password and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm thinking, it would probably be a good idea to do some kind of validation of what comes in, because a lot of times when you're doing your scripts, and I'm not necessarily going to use the term guilty of this because it really kind of depends on context, but if you're writing a little one-off script, you write this in the context of it's going to work. Like, you do your script, it does what it needs to do, great. However, if you're writing scripts for other people, like this for example, when it's done, it's freely available here on GitLab, and if you want to use it for your own lab to be able to make some users, by all means use it. And so when you're writing scripts for others, especially for yourself sometimes too, you want to handle or try to handle situations where things don't go right, such as a user puts in an invalid value for some variable that you have in your script, and rather than have the script just die and fall apart right there, you want to be able to have a way of handling that. And so in the beginning here, with the first commit, I have several while loops, and I have a variable data check while not data check, and so it starts as false. So while this evaluates to true, we're going to be asking the user, tell me the total number of users you want to create. Read host is going to read stuff as strings, so I cat that to an integer, so that way I can use this as an actual number later on if I find myself to. And to validate this, what I decided to do was check two things. With integers, or really with almost anything, there's a function, this get type code, and I'm checking to see if it's int32. Now, of course, a problem with this is, well, what if it's something that's not int32? But in my testing, doing a couple iterations of this, int32 is what it came out as. I'm also checking to see if the total users are greater than 0, because if you're wanting to make 0 users, then why are you using the script? And if this passes, then data check's going to evaluate to true, and therefore this will evaluate to false and will break out of the while loop. Else, I'm going to give the user a message, and actually using write warning for this rather than write host. It says invalidated, please give number greater than 0. So it'll keep looping through this until the user gives me something that is greater than 0. And of course, that's setting to total users to create. So the next thing I want my users to do is give me basically the word part of a username. So this will be, let's say they want the prefix to be Eddie, all right, and then they want to make 50 users. Well, the script's going to make Eddie 1, Eddie 2, Eddie 3, all the way through Eddie 50. So I have some logic here. Another while loop. While data check is not true, then, or rather, while data check false is true, we're going to keep going through the loop here. And I ask if whatever they have entered, and I'm sending it to a string, if what they've entered is what they want, they can give me Y or N, so I'm doing a little if statement checking for that. And if it passes, it's true. Then it checks to see, and this I had to do a little bit of research on, because I don't do regular expressions all the time in PowerShell, and it's I mean, it's something I understand, but it's also something like I just don't use every day, and so I generally have to look this kind of stuff up. If you're new to PowerShell and you're learning, don't feel discouraged by having to look stuff up. It is, at least in my opinion, it is perfectly fine. It's not possible to have all this stuff in your head, and if it is for you, congratulations, you win PowerShell. But for the rest of us mortals, we have to look stuff up. And so this is checking to see if whatever the string is matches a character that's not a letter or number, or if it matches something that is a number, then it's going to warn them this contains things other than letters, continue, yes, no. Depending on that particular prompt, the data check will be set to false. And really, if I were doing this, I would want to rename this variable like is bad data or something, because data check equals false. Just looking at it right now, talking to you, is ambiguous. And I'm when I'm writing my code, I try to get rid of ambiguity. I want to be as clear as I can. You'll notice I don't have any comments here. I'm not opposed to using comments, but I do try to write stuff in a way that if I find that I'm really having to rely on comments, maybe there's a clearer way for me to write the thing. Sometimes there isn't. You have to use your comments to explain what's going on. It checks to see if the string is actually of type string. And what I do here, I made a variable at one point, the warning prompt. Okay, that was the WriteHost getting the user prefix. Something I will often do in a loop, and I picked this up from my current boss actually at work, is removing variables either at the very beginning or the very end of a loop, even though the value, once the loop gets back to that particular point and writes the value, it should overwrite what's there. I like doing this just as a general, make sure stuff doesn't work. So for the first commit, this is all I did. I made a way of doing the checking for number of users and then for prefix. So the next day when I started working on this, or either next day or a little bit later, I can't remember which, I started thinking, maybe it would make more sense to write these particular tasks that I'm wanting to do in the script as functions. And my thinking behind that is, all right, so if I really flesh this thing out and get it to a final state, it will probably be easier if I wanted to add stuff later. If these things, sets of things to do, such as get the number of users and get the user prefix, it may make more sense to do that as a function that you can call later. And you define all of your functions at the beginning of the script and then call them as you need them, and they'll return whatever value you need them to return. So that leads to some other commits. And let me go back to branch master. So the very next commit that I had with this script is dealing with the password creation. Now I decided to go ahead and start trying to use functions for the password creation part. So I will say one of the things I did first, when I first started figuring out how I want to handle the password creation, I had written things just as I did with getting the number of users and such, and then kind of in the middle of that, I'm like, wait, why don't I write this as a function? And so I did. And functions used to be this like black magic when I was early in my working with PowerShell. You hear function, oh, it's some advanced thing you can't do. No, all a function is just a set of instructions that you've given a name. It's just like a variable is a set of values that, or a single value, depending on what you're doing, that you've given a name. A function is simply a set of instructions, such as all this WriteHost. This is, if I call the function password creation instructions, this right here is what's going to run. Nothing more, nothing less. The password creation choice. This is where the users are going to decide how they want to have the password made with this script. And notice within a function, I'm calling a function. So I have a function that's the instructions, right? And so then we get into the function of password creation choice. Again, I have my little data check here. I make a warning message because no matter how the user may mess up the input, I am always going to give them the same message. Please enter what the appropriate input is, and I'm given an option for H to display instructions. So again, I have the same kind of while loop, and a switch, if you're not familiar with that, I liken switch to if with options, to where rather than having to have a bunch of nested if statements, if you have kind of a set values that you want to check against, you can use the switch statement to look for each of those particular values, and then if nothing matches, you have a default value, which it's going to do that. If I'm just repeating myself, sorry, if nothing matches there. So even though PowerShell, or rather, even though Windows is not case sensitive, I hesitate to say PowerShell isn't case sensitive, and the reason being, this is going to go off on a little tangent, but I noticed working with PowerCLI and VMware, when you connect to your vCenter and you're using the PS drive to be able to browse your data stores, unless I just happen to have like this fluke version of PowerCLI and we're using some strange thing of VMware, it is case sensitive. And so I know Windows itself is not, but PowerShell I don't think cares. And it kind of makes sense because PowerShell is just the shell, nothing more. So what I'm doing here, I decided to use the regex parameter because I want to check for both, if they put a capital A or lowercase a, I'm going to consider that a valid answer. So in my function, I call password creation instructions. And so this function calls this function that will list these instructions. User puts in whatever it is that they want to put in. If they put in A, again, all I'm doing right here is setting the data check value for that while loop, because otherwise it'll keep looping through there. If they press H, then I call that function again. So if I didn't have this as a function, I would have had this, this is how many lines? 18 to 32, so that's 14 lines of text. I would have these 14 lines appearing twice in my script versus using a function, even though this isn't some real fancy function with parameters and all that kind of good stuff, but using the function allows you to reuse some of your code, which is the whole point of it. Something I find myself when I'm writing scripts is functions will often appear, at least for me, out of, I'm having to write this more than once. Can I make that into a function? Maybe one day my brain will think in the way of functions first, but for right now, it's a function is often a response to, can I do this better? And then the default choice, so if they put something other than an A, B, C, or an H upper lowercase, then it's going to write the warning message. Since data check was set to false, data check should still be false with this, therefore the while loop is going to continue. And I think what else I did here, I think I left this the same. Yep, left the user prefix stuff the same. So kind of the progression of this project, that next commit was, let me do the password, the checking for how they want to make passwords. Let me make that into a function. So continuing on, I'm going to go back to the master branch and look at the commits. Very next commit. Now we deal with actually making the passwords, and these I decided already to just go ahead and start it as a function. I didn't get to this part. Let me open up the file here. start working with this and then make it into a function, I went ahead and created functions. And notice how we have, just I have them in order here. They're at the very top of the script. And here I went ahead, I'm actually doing two things and two processes. So first of all, I decided to go ahead and start by making a function to be able to make the user provided password, because remember, one of the things with the project is I want users to be able to specify their password, or have a random password for everyone that's unique, or have a random password for everyone that's the same. Another thing that I did, I was thinking about this with these while loops. I have to set the variable, set while, and that's not a bad thing. That's kind of how while works. While this thing is true, do this thing. But the more I think about it, and I'm eventually going to be rewriting these, the more I think about it, the thing that I want the function to do, I want it to do it at least once, which is the get the data from the user. So it makes more sense to do a do while loop. Do while is very similar to while, with the exception of the check for if something is true and therefore do the thing. The check happens at the end. So with this function here, it's going to do all this stuff first. Then while whatever my my test that I'm doing, while that's true, go back and do it again. And then when it eventually is false, you break out of the loop. And so the progression of thought there is, as I'm doing this, I realize, hey, I want all of these things to at least fire off once, so start writing these as do while loops. That changes how I handle my variables, though. Here in my do while loop, I am getting the information from the user. I'm doing some the password confirmation. Basically, it's the user is going to write a password. I don't cast this as a string. I'm okay with that because, well, that should read it. I might change my mind and cast that as a string. That when I say cast as a string, that so welcome to developing a script. I'm kind of thinking this through live on the video here. Sometimes you'll go back and forth trying to decide the best way to do it. I'm curious, if you have an opinion, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'm inclined to no longer not cast that as a string, because WriteHost is going to be reading this as a string, and I'm specifically wanting this to be a string. So what we're doing here, then odd. Looking at the syntax highlighting, and it didn't catch WriteHost. I must have an error somewhere. Where's my error? Oh well, I'll find it. I'm not going to debug or make you watch me debug my own script. But what it's going to do, capture the password. It's going to write back password that you entered is this thing, and then it is going to I think it's possibly see why. Anyway, see, it bothers me now. This is another thing you'll probably notice as you get a little bit more chops in scripting, is when you see something wrong, it'll keep bothering you until you get it right. Anyway, so do another is this correct, y or n, password confirmation. This time, simple if statement. If it matches y, set data check to true, else set data check to false. I know for a fact I'm going to go back and change the name of this data check because I don't like how that is. And at the very end, I have capture password, because I want this function to return whatever it is that the user has put in for the password. And that's all there is to it. Now, one other thing I encourage you to do if you're young with making your scripts is commit often. Like when you think you're done with a thing, commit it. So that way, if something goes wrong and you have to go back to commits, now granted I haven't done that before, I'm not super advanced with Git, but it'll be a little bit easier to kind of pinpoint the moment in time of the development of your script where something went wrong. So, and again, the other stuff still there. I haven't made any changes to it. Let me go back to master. And I'm looking at my commits. And so next thing that I did was make a function for the random password generation, and it followed the same idea. I'm probably going to make another video on the random password generation as far as how I made that happen. But the big thing the other big thing I wanted to show you is, since I made that decision to start using stuff as functions, then I've gone back and I've started to turn some of the things that were there that weren't a function into a function. And let me show you the example of this here. So what I did was that code that was the create the number of users, I decided to do two things. I rewrote it as a function, and I changed the logic to where it uses the do while loop. And so what you have in green here is what was eventually added with this particular commit. And functionality wise, it's the exact same. It asks the user, hey, how many users do you want to make? Casts, because remember, WriteHost is going to give it as a string. It casts it as an integer. I do the same validation checking. I have my bad variable name that I'm going to change, and voila. So it was fairly easy to turn that into a function, mainly because, remember, function is just a set of statements, nothing more, nothing less, and it's not too difficult to rewrite the do while function. One mistake that I see here, that I need to fix, is right now this function, if I'm correct, is not going to return anything. Because once it gets done, that's it. I need to add the variable of total users to create, which I might have fixed that in another commit. So let me go back to the commits list. And we'll get to the very last one here. And in this, I rewrote the user creation. And this allowed to create a function for the instructions, just like I did the password creation, and then all of the logic here. And so the end result with that is, see, I added the total users to create to the other function. I figured I would have fixed that. So here I've made a function of the instructions, just like I did for the password creation, and I made a function changing the logic to do while to handle the making of a user prefix, and also improved a little bit of the variable naming here. So they're going to read in the user, what I'm calling the user prefix, so the word part of the name. It's going to check if it's a string, and if it is, I've made a variable called isString. It's either going to be true or false. It's again going to check to see if there's if there are first of all, any non-letter or numbers, and then check if there are numbers. I'm calling that a valid string because what I'm wanting this script, this particular piece, to specifically allow a word for this username. And then I check, I display what the user put in. I give them an opportunity to say yes or no. And this is another little if statement, user question response. They either approve it or they don't. Then, and this is a little bit different logic, but I think kind of works better and also handles this the way that I'm wanting. It's going to test if at the same time, if this actually is a string. It's going to test, is it a valid string? So before I gave the user an option, just do you want to continue? Now I'm like, nope, I want this just to be letters. And then it tests if the user has approved of what they have. And if all of these are true, then this is where the better naming of the variables comes in. User prefix invalid will be set to false. Wait, I might have messed up my logic here. Okay, no, I didn't. is user prefix is invalid is false, which that would be true if all three of these things evaluate to true. The string is valid, first of all, the string is a string. Secondly, it's valid. Thirdly, the user approves it. If any of these fail, then user prefix is invalid is true. While user prefix is invalid is true, then it's going to do the do loop. So another little quick sidebar. So as you're working with your scripts and you're thinking through your logic, talk the logic out. There, I might have sounded kind of silly just a few seconds ago when I questioned my own logic with this, but if you talk it out, you are more likely to catch mistakes, and it is much better to catch a mistake now and fix it than have that mistake and the code go to production and it breaks because of that mistake. Try to fix them as much as you can. Lastly, what I decided to do is give them a different error message depending on what the problem is. And I decided to use an if-else if for this, because if what they've given me is not a string, which is highly unlikely, but if it isn't, and I might get rid of this because I need to read up on GetHost just to make 100% sure that ReadHost returns a string, because if it does, then I'll blow this away. I don't even need to worry about that. But since it's my first test, if that is false, then this will evaluate to true, and I'm going to write this particular warning. If this does not evaluate to true, then it's going to check whether or not the string was a valid string, and then tell the user whatever it is they put in contains other than letters, please try again. And since we've already determined if the prefix itself is valid or not, then we may or may not go through the loop again, and then at the very end I have the user prefix, because that's what I want to have returned. So a bit long-winded. The idea behind this is to kind of show you my methodology of how I've, or let me do the view file here. There you go. So that way you can see the full file in action. I'll scroll through this. Of course, you can always go to GitLab and see it yourself as well. So what I wanted to do with this was kind of walk you through my thought process with working with this particular script and the fact that it's not done, and just show how I'm getting from point A to point B with it. Because I can remember when I first started writing some PowerShell stuff and really kind of writing things on my own versus, hey, here's a problem, I have to fix the problem. Well, this sort of is that, but it's a little bit different than something's broke, use PowerShell to fix it. These are some things that I would have wanted to see years ago when I first started working with this, just to kind of validate my own thought process and such. So I'm curious to hear if you yourself write some stuff in PowerShell. What are your thought processes as far as when to use functions? And do you try to do the function first approach, or do you do kind of what I do, which is a hybrid of, maybe I can do this as a function, or hey, I'm doing this multiple times, let's definitely write a function about that. I'm always curious to hear your feedback on it. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you click like. Also subscribe, ring the bell when you do, and feel free to share this with anyone you think might find some use out of it. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.